UGC here! Conversation 1. The Promise. Raising the next generation of just leaders. John. We all like promises, especially when the promise is for something good that will happen in the future. So God had Abraham's attention when he made a big promise. On the surface, the idea looked impossible, even outrageous. God pledged to bless the entire world through Abraham, everyone alive at the time, and everyone who would ever be born. Every single person. Abraham, no doubt, trusted God, but he also knew that, just being one person, he could not bless that many people. So God's big plan must have seemed daunting. And there was one small other issue. Shane. Abraham didn't even get the promise until he was about 80 years old. And it was another 20 years before his son was born. Hey, John's almost 80, so he could just be getting started. John. What seemed unfeasible to man was quite doable for God. He kept his promise by blessing one man, Abraham, then another, Abraham's son, Isaac, then a household, then a community, then a region, and now you and me. You can read the entire story in Genesis 11:21. As the promise was passed forward, God blessed each new generation. When God blesses, the blessing is not stagnant. It moves and multiplies. The idea is to plant a seed, then water it and grow it, and then give it to the next generation. The blessing is not for one person. It is not just for you or me alone. Rather, it was given to Abraham and is now given to us so that we may be a blessing to others. That's the real purpose of ministry. Abraham blessed Isaac. Isaac blessed Jacob. Jacob blessed his 12 sons, which became the tribes of Israel. The blessing followed each person's faithfulness. Shane. These forefathers and mothers were willing to leave everything they had for the promise of something better, even when the promise seemed impossible or laughable. Like a barren woman giving birth at 90 years old. That's how old Sarah was when Isaac was born. Believing in the promise meant they held everything lightly, and when God said move, they trusted and moved. It all started with an 80-year-old man who dared to listen to God. What we pass along is hope and vision that can be carried forth. John. The promise is hope for something in the future, but what is the blessing? Some may equate blessing with material possessions. A big house, a car, lots of toys. Others may assume blessing means happiness, kindness, and security. We say a blessing before a meal, and our children bless us. But God's promise of a blessing to Abraham was something more. Follow me closely here. This passing on of the promise is the blessing, and the act of passing the blessing along is therefore as important as the promise, because it becomes the fulfillment of the promise. If a blessing is complete or finished, there is nothing to pass along except a memory. A blessing supersedes individual achievement and movements. It goes beyond a particular moment in time or spot on the map. A blessing is like a living organism. Not some kind of plaque we hang on a wall or meal we eat at the end of the day. The promise contains hope, but there is always an element of it that goes unfulfilled. Sure, we might make progress and see some of the promise come about, but what we pass along is hope and a vision that can be carried forth, and a little bit more of it will be fulfilled by the next generation, and then the next. I call this continued leadership. My daughter Elizabeth calls it passing the baton. This sets the stage for what seems to be a follower and a leader today. Shane. Hey, we could call this sustainable leadership. A leadership that reproduces itself. John. That reminds me of the story of a guy named Moses. Shane. The basketball player? John. Haha, no. Moses the liberator. He exemplifies reproducible leadership at its best. I've been using him as a model for the past 50 years, and he has everything to say to us today. Let me tell you about his journey out of Pharaoh's land of captivity. Although Pharaoh had decreed that babies born to Hebrew slaves would be killed when Moses was born, by faith his parents hid him for 3 months because they saw he was a beautiful or proper child. And they were not afraid of the king's commandment. Hebrews tells the whole story best. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to endure ill treatment with the people of God than to enjoy the passing pleasures of sin. Considering the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures of Egypt, he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured, as seeing him who is unseen. By faith he kept the Passover, and the sprinkling of blood, so that he who destroyed the firstborn would not touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea, as though they were passing through dry land, and the Egyptians, when they attempted it, were drowned. Hebrews 11:24-29. Here we have both what made Moses into a great person, as well as the task that he was to undertake. Moses became what I call a just leader. A man who heard the cry of his people and led them to freedom. make no excuse. First, when we look at Moses and the circumstances of his birth, none of us today would have excuse to be less than what God says we are. Moses was born in poverty, as a slave. He was conceived to be aborted. That's right, he was not supposed to survive outside of his mother's womb. He was born in the most difficult situation when a decree had gone out that all baby boys must be killed. What kind of psychological damage does that cause to a child? Moses' success proves that we shouldn't attribute our present failures to an unfortunate past. We black folks, John is black, we black folks need to hear that. We can't blame slavery for everything, especially when we understand it. We poor folks need to hear that. We can't constantly mop on and on about what we don't have and yet try not to get a job or some skills and do something about it. No matter how unjustly we have been treated, we have to stop playing the victim. We undereducated folks need to hear that. We can't forever waste time griping on how life would be, oh, so different if we just had a good education. We need to pick up the book and start reading. Find a mentor and start asking questions. We preachers need to hear that. We can't recoil from the gospel because our culture doesn't like some of it. We need to love even more. Moses could have remained a victim. He could have spent his life crying, I was a slave! I was supposed to be aborted! He could have used it as reasons to waver and fail. Instead, Moses went on to become the greatest leader, outside of Jesus Christ, that ever walked on earth. Shane. I like this idea of a just leader. And it makes good sense that we cannot remain victims if we are ever to see freedom. We cannot forget the past, but the past does not hold us captive. We may have scars, but scars remind us that we survived. So how did Moses rise above his circumstances? John. Moses was born into a tough environment, one of the tension and suffering and pain. Jot down the word pain. It will come up many times in this book. Rather than moan and complain, we are to count it all joy while we fall into suffering. That our faith is precious like gold. It's that refining fire that shapes our life for the task God has called us to. One of the first things that we learn about Moses' life is that when he was born, his parents hid him for 3 months. Moses' parents, in the midst of the horrible decree to kill all baby boys, protected him. He had a family. They put his safety ahead of their own survival. You can't be a great leader if you can't guide your own family with love and honor. The basis for leadership and the greatest environment in which to develop leaders is the family. Jot down family. As Shane and I will talk much about it, you will see how family and community are intertwined. Leaders will mature and develop better if they come from an intact family that passes on love and instills a strong identity with dignity. You can't be a great leader if you can't guide your own family with love and honor. Our God is a God who loves the family. That's how we end up with the concept of the Trinity. At first, it seems that God is talking to himself in Genesis when he says, "Let us make man," Genesis 1:26. A good theological study shows that Jesus is the eternal Son and the Holy Spirit is the Comforter. All three were present from the beginning and make up the family of God, the Godhead. From this, we see that from the beginning, God the Father did not lead alone. He did so from within the context of the family. That's what makes what we face today in the breakdown of the family structure so tragic. Have you noticed that most of our immorality today is of sexual variety? Is sex gone wild in our society? Why? Because the family is broken. Let me go on a little sidetrack. I just heard about something hideous. A grandmother molesting her own grandchild. That went all over my bones. And it made me appreciate my own precious granddaughter, Vera, and our family. We are not perfect, not by a long shot. Just ask my sons and daughters. They will tell you. But I think we can get some things right. Yet, as a leader, it is a constant challenge of priorities. So that was the first 5 pages of Follow Me to Freedom, Leading and Following as an Ordinary Radical by Shane Claiborne and John M. Perkins. So if you like what I read, check them out online, find a library, just get your hands on it. It's pretty good. So remember, new videos on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Friday. Like it, subscribe, and check it out.